This morning in the Strait of Hormuz, a container ship called the MSC Francesca was moving through one of the most contested stretches of water on the planet. No weapons, no military escort, just cargo and crew. Then, without a single warning, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard gunboat pulled alongside and opened fire. The bridge took heavy damage. And that was just the first ship. By the time you finish watching this video, the number may be 3. I need you to understand something right now. What happened this morning is not a skirmish. This may be the moment historians look back on and say, that is where it started. Let me be upfront with you about who I am and why that matters right now. I am not a CNN anchor reading from a teleprompter. I am not a Fox News host telling you there was a coup in Tehran when there was absolutely no coup in Tehran. I have spent over a decade tracking geopolitical strategy in the Gulf region, studying the institutions, the decision makers, the back-channel communications, and the patterns of behavior that mainstream media either misses or deliberately ignores. And what is happening right now, today, in the Strait of Hormuz, is something I have seen building for weeks. Here is what I am going to give you in the next 20 minutes that you will not get anywhere else. First, I am going to show you exactly why Iran chose this specific morning to fire on those ships. This was not impulsive. This was calculated, and the timing tells you everything. Second, I am going to walk you through what Pakistan's role in this negotiation actually looks like behind the scenes, because the picture is far more complicated and far more alarming than anyone is reporting. Third, I am going to lay out 3 concrete scenarios for what happens in the next 72 hours. One of them ends in de-escalation. One of them ends in a frozen conflict that slowly bleeds the global economy. And one of them ends in something none of us want to say out loud, but all of us need to be prepared for. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now. Not as a favor to me. Do it because when this situation moves, and it will move fast, this is where you will get the analysis first, before the headlines, before the spin. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next update may come sooner than any of us expect. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us start with what we actually know, the hard facts, before we get into what those facts mean. This morning, 3 ships came under attack in the Strait of Hormuz. 3, not 1. The first vessel, the MSC Francesca, was approached by a single Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps gunboat. No warning was given. The gunboat opened fire directly on the bridge of the ship, the command center, the brain of the entire vessel. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Center confirmed this. They reported heavy damage. And here's the detail I want you to hold on to for a moment. Attacking the bridge is not a warning shot. A warning shot goes into the water. A warning shot goes above the deck. When you fire on the bridge, you are sending a message. We will come back to exactly what that message is. The second and third vessels, identified as the Epimenides and a ship called the Euphoria, were seized, boarded, taken into Iranian coastal waters. Iranian state media confirmed this and said those ships had been ignoring repeated navigational warnings. Now, I want you to notice something very specific here, because this is the kind of detail that reveals how information is being shaped in real time. When the New York Times first reported this story, they described the Iranian action as, and I'm reading this directly, an enforcement action. An enforcement action. That is almost neutral language. Almost neutral. That is language that implicitly acknowledges Iran's position that they are enforcing their own blockade of the strait. Then, sometime later, that same story was quietly updated. The words changed. Suddenly, it became attacked and boarded. Do you see what happened there? An editor somewhere made a decision about which reality you were going to read. I am not telling you which version is correct. I am telling you that the language used to describe an act of war shapes whether the public supports or opposes the response to that act of war. That matters. That matters enormously. Now let us zoom out just slightly and talk about where this sits in the timeline, because the attack did not happen in a vacuum. 72 hours before those gunboats appeared in the strait, Donald Trump was on CNBC saying he was not inclined to extend the ceasefire with Iran. Then hours later, he posted on Truth Social saying he was extending the ceasefire indefinitely. Then, in that same post, he made clear the naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was staying in place. Iran responded publicly, saying Trump's extension, and I want to be precise here, quote, means nothing. Within hours of that statement, Iranian forces were in the water. Here's a number I need you to sit with for a moment. 20 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That is somewhere between 20 and 30% of the world's entire seaborne oil supply moving through a stretch of water that, at its narrowest point, is roughly 21 miles wide. 21 miles. The state of Rhode Island is bigger than that. And right now, that stretch of water is the single most dangerous place on the planet. Iran has said publicly and repeatedly that they are losing approximately $500 million per day because of the American naval blockade. $500 million every single day. And yet they have not backed down on their demand that the blockade must be lifted before any negotiations can begin. Ask yourself this question, and I want you to really think about it before I give you my analysis. If you were losing $500 million a day, and the other side kept extending a ceasefire while keeping the thing that was costing you $500 million a day firmly in place, what would you do? Because Iran just told you exactly what they would do, and here is what I have not told you yet. The decision to fire on those ships this morning did not happen spontaneously. There are strong indications, and we are going to get into this in detail right now, that this action was a direct and deliberate response to something that happened in a back-channel negotiation that completely collapsed at the last moment. Here is where it gets complicated. And I mean, genuinely complicated, not cable news complicated, not Twitter complicated, but the kind of complicated that actually determines whether there is a war or not. Let us talk about Pakistan. Most of the coverage you are seeing right now is focused on Iran and the United States. But there is a third player in this negotiation that is not getting nearly enough attention, and understanding their role is, in my view, the key to understanding why those ships got fired on this morning. Pakistan has been positioning itself as the primary intermediary between Washington and Tehran. Their prime minister, their field marshal, their entire diplomatic apparatus has been publicly staking enormous credibility on the idea that they can broker this deal. They have been flying back and forth. They have been on the phone. They have been presenting themselves to the world as the kingpins of modern diplomacy. Their words, essentially. And that matters, because when a country invests that much national prestige into a mediation role, they have a very powerful incentive to make the talks appear to be progressing, whether they actually are or not. Now, here is the piece of information that I think reframes everything you have watched unfold in the last 48 hours. According to sourcing that is close to the Iranian side of these negotiations, Pakistan came to Tehran with a very specific message shortly before the ceasefire deadline. The message was this: before the ceasefire expires, the United States is going to announce that it is lifting the naval blockade on the Strait of Hormuz and extending the ceasefire. Iran reportedly responded by saying, if that happens, we will schedule a second round of talks for Thursday. There was a framework. There was a choreography. Both sides had agreed to their lines. And then Trump posted on Truth Social saying he was extending the ceasefire, but keeping the naval blockade fully in place. I want you to think very carefully about what that means, because there are only three possible explanations, and each one is alarming in its own distinct way. Explanation one: Pakistan overstepped. They told Iran something that Trump never actually agreed to, either to keep the process alive or to elevate their own role as indispensable mediators. If this is true, Pakistan essentially manufactured a diplomatic agreement that did not exist and handed Iran a justification to walk away from the table entirely. Explanation two: Trump agreed to lift the blockade in a conversation with Pakistani leadership and then changed his mind. This is entirely consistent with the pattern we observed over 72 hours, where Trump publicly stated he might travel to Islamabad, then said Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were on their way, then said J.D. Vance was going, then said nobody was going, then said he might bomb Iran back to civilization, then extended the ceasefire. If a president can reverse course that many times in 3 days on a question of war and peace, reversing a private commitment to a Pakistani official is entirely within the pattern. Explanation three, and this is the one I am going to ask you to hold as a question rather than a conclusion: there is a third party that benefits from these talks failing. a party with deep influence over American foreign policy decision-making in the Middle East, a party for whom a diplomatic resolution between Washington and Tehran would represent a significant strategic setback. I am not going to name that party directly because I want you to think about who fits that description. But I will say this. When a carefully choreographed diplomatic moment collapses at the exact last second, the first question any serious analyst asks is, who benefits from the collapse? Now, here is what makes this even more significant. Iranian officials, in communications that have been described by people close to the negotiations, expressed that they do not entirely know what Pakistan was actually told by Trump versus what Pakistan chose to relay to them. There is a trust gap so wide right now that neither side is entirely sure whether the other side's intermediary is accurately representing reality. Do you understand what that means in practice? Two countries, one of which has nuclear capability and one of which is suspected of being very close to it, are making decisions about war and peace based on messages being carried by a third party that neither of them fully trusts. That is not diplomacy. That is a blindfolded walk through a minefield. And the fuse, as of this morning, just got significantly shorter. I want to slow down for a moment. We have been moving fast. Facts, timelines, back-channel communications, collapsing frameworks, and that pace is appropriate because the situation itself is moving fast. But I think it is important right now to step back from the immediate chaos and look at the larger picture. Because when you zoom out far enough, what you see is not just a dispute over a stretch of water between Iran and the United States. What you see is something that should concern every person watching this video, regardless of where you live or what you think about Donald Trump or the Iranian government. Let us start with the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is approximately 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. That is the distance, 21 miles. Through that, 21 miles of water flows somewhere between 20 and 30% of the world's seaborne oil supply every single day. But it is not just oil. Roughly 30% of the world's liquefied natural gas, the fuel that heats homes across Europe and Asia, also moves through that strait. Japan depends on it. South Korea depends on it. India depends on it. China, and this is the number I want you to remember, imports approximately 40% of its total oil supply through the Strait of Hormuz. 40%. You do not need to be a geopolitical analyst to understand what that means for Beijing's interest in what happens next. China is not sitting on the sidelines here. China is watching every single development with an intensity that most Western coverage is completely ignoring. Now, let me ask you something directly. When you fill up your car, when you pay your electricity bill, when you buy groceries that were transported across an ocean, do you think about the Strait of Hormuz? Probably not. Most people do not. But the people who set the price of oil think about it every single day. And right now, those people are watching 3 seized ships and a fired-upon bridge. And they are running calculations that will eventually show up in your daily life, whether you follow geopolitics or not. This is not abstract. This is not distant. This is already connected to you. Now, I want to address something that has been circulating heavily in American media over the last 24 hours, because it is important and because it is wrong. There are major outlets, and I mean primetime, highest-rated cable news programs, that are telling their audiences Iran is in total internal collapse, that there was a coup, that the foreign minister is under house arrest, that the IRGC has seized control of the entire government, that nobody in Tehran knows who is in charge. I need you to understand something about Iran's institutional structure, because this narrative is not just inaccurate, it is dangerous. Iran has spent 47 years, since 1979, building parallel institutions precisely because they have always understood that the United States could move against them at any moment. They have an official military and the Revolutionary Guard, an official intelligence ministry and a separate IRGC intelligence apparatus, religious, judicial, and political institutions that operate with overlapping checks and balances. The supreme leader holds veto authority, but major decisions, particularly decisions of this magnitude, move through the Supreme National Security Council. This is not a government in chaos. This is a government that made a decision. And when you mischaracterize your adversary as weak and disorganized, you make catastrophically bad decisions about how to respond to them. That is where we are right now. And the next move is the one that matters most. Now we get to the part that nobody is talking about. And I mean that seriously. I have watched the coverage all morning. I have read the dispatches. I have gone through the statements from both sides. And there is a layer to this story that keeps getting glossed over, buried under the noise of Trump's Truth Social posts and the cable news debate about whether or not there was a coup in Tehran. So I am going to lay it out for you as clearly as I can. Go back to that moment when Iran's foreign minister made a public statement saying the Strait of Hormuz would remain open because the United States had compelled Israel to respect a ceasefire in Lebanon. That statement was significant. It was a signal. It was Iran publicly offering a way for both sides to de-escalate without either side losing face. Trump responded by actually referring to it as the Strait of Iran, which, whether intentional or not, was itself a kind of acknowledgement. And for approximately a few hours, it looked like the choreography was working. Then Trump went on social media and announced the naval blockade was staying in place permanently. What I want you to understand is that this was not just a policy reversal. According to people with direct knowledge of the back-channel communications, this specific sequence, Iran signals, Trump acknowledges, then Trump reverses, had been scripted in advance. The Pakistanis had gone to the Iranians and said, this is what is going to happen, step by step. Iran had responded by saying, if step 1 and step 2 occur as described, we will agree to step 3. And step 3 was returning to the negotiating table. When Trump skipped from step 2 directly to destroying the entire framework, Iran did not just lose a negotiating round. They lost the ability to trust any future framework that comes through the same channel. Now, I want you to feel the weight of that for a moment, because here is what that means in practice. Every future communication that travels through Pakistan to Iran now arrives carrying a fundamental question that cannot be answered in advance. Is this real? Or is this another choreography that will collapse at the last second? And when you cannot answer that question, you stop taking risks on diplomacy. You stop making yourself vulnerable to a last-minute reversal. You start making decisions based on the assumption that the other side is not negotiating in good faith. And what does a country do when it concludes the other side is not negotiating in good faith, while simultaneously losing $500 million every single day? You saw what they do this morning. But here is the part that should genuinely alarm you. And I am not saying this for dramatic effect. I am saying this because the historical pattern is unambiguous. The most dangerous moments in modern military conflict have almost never been the result of one side deliberately choosing war. They have been the result of miscalculation, of one side taking an action they believed was measured and proportional, and the other side interpreting that action as something fundamentally more threatening. Iran seizing 3 ships may have been, in their own calculus, a controlled and proportional response, a demonstration of capability without crossing into full escalation. But there are decision makers in Washington right now, and in Tel Aviv, and in Riyadh, who are looking at those same 3 ships and seeing something very different. When 2 sides look at the same event and reach opposite conclusions about what it means, that is not a stable situation. That is how wars begin. Not with a declaration, not with a clear decision, but with a moment that each side interprets through a completely different lens, and neither side realizes the gap until it is too late to close it. The next 72 hours are not just important. They may be the most consequential 72 hours we have seen in this region in years. And I want to make sure you understand exactly what the possible paths forward actually look like. Let me give you the 3 scenarios. And I want to be clear. These are analytical frameworks based on the patterns and information we have walked through together. Nobody can tell you with certainty which path this takes, but understanding the possibilities is how you stay ahead of what is coming. Scenario 1, de-escalation. Probability, roughly 20%. This is the path where cooler heads prevail. Trump facing pressure from markets, from allies, from the reality that $500 million a day in Iranian losses is also translating into upward pressure on global oil prices, makes the decision to quietly signal a willingness to reduce the naval presence in the strait. Not announce it, not tweet it. Quietly signal it through a back channel that Iran can actually trust. Iran, having demonstrated this morning that they are serious and capable, accepts that signal as sufficient face-saving and agrees to return to preliminary talks. The ships get released. The situation breathes. I want to be honest with you about why I put this at 20%. It requires Trump to do something consistently and reliably over a period of days. Everything we have observed over the last 72 hours suggests that is the variable most likely to fail. Scenario 2, frozen conflict, probability roughly 50%. This is the scenario that sounds less dramatic, but is, in many ways, the most dangerous over the long term. The ceasefire holds on paper, the blockade stays in place. Iran continues conducting what they describe as enforcement actions, seizing vessels, disrupting traffic, applying pressure in ways that stay just below the threshold that would trigger a full American military response. The global economy absorbs a slow, grinding increase in shipping costs, insurance premiums, and energy prices. Months pass. The situation becomes normalized. And in that normalization, in that exhaustion, someone makes a mistake, a miscommunication, a trigger pulled 1 second too early, and the frozen conflict becomes something else entirely. 50%. This is where I think we are most likely headed, and it should not comfort you. Scenario 3, uncontrolled escalation. Probability, roughly 30%. An American vessel gets hit, or an American service member is killed. Or Israel, watching this window of American military engagement, makes its own calculation about what is possible right now. One event, one single event that was not planned, not intended, not part of anyone's strategic framework, pulls every other player into a response they cannot walk back. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Iran is at a threshold that most serious analysts find deeply concerning. The United States has carrier groups in the region right now, and we have a president who, in the span of 72 hours, publicly threatened to bomb a country back to civilization and then extended their ceasefire. I need you to sit with that combination for a moment. So let me ask you the question that I think actually matters here. Not who fired first, not whose blockade is legitimate. The question that matters is this: is there a single person in this entire equation who has both the authority to stop this and the consistency to follow through? Because right now, I am not sure there is. Let us bring this back to where we started. A container ship, a gunboat, no warning, heavy damage to the bridge. That image is not just a news story. That is the physical representation of everything we have walked through today. The collapsed choreography, the broken trust, the erratic decision-making, the miscalculations compounding on top of each other in real time inside one of the most economically critical stretches of water on the planet. Here is what I need you to take away from this analysis. Trump's fundamental inconsistency is not just a domestic political problem. It is a direct liability in a situation where the difference between war and peace depends on whether the other side believes what they are being told. Pakistan's role as intermediary is now severely compromised, possibly irreparably. Iran is not in chaos. Iran made a calculated decision this morning, and that decision has a clear logic behind it. And the mainstream media narrative you are being fed about what is happening in Tehran is, in significant ways, disconnected from the reality that people closest to this situation are actually describing. The next 72 hours will tell us which of those three scenarios is taking shape. And I will be here the moment there is a meaningful development to analyze. If this breakdown gave you something that the standard coverage did not, a framework, a deeper context, a question worth thinking about, then hit the like button right now, not for me, because the algorithm uses that signal to push this kind of analysis toward people who are trying to actually understand what is happening in the world rather than just react to headlines, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave me a comment telling me which scenario you think is most likely, because the next update is coming, and you do not want to miss it when it does.